Hello, gloomy homies, and welcome to our happy hour episode. I think we're on episode 6 now. How is it going this fast already? Today, I am going to be joined by the beautiful Amanda as we talk about doing the inner child work and how this plays into our present life. I know it's a huge thing. Hi, lovely. A huge thing, and that has come up for me during quarantine and everything has been all this stuff from growing up and all the things to be done. I think it's joining. Yes. Okay. It's been a big thing, so I'm really excited to have Amanda join. Hi, sweetie.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here. I cannot wait.
I'm so excited. This is one where I love your profile. And so it's just like, oh my God. And going through COVID right now and being single and in this Vipassana, that I did not ask for, all the inner child stuff has come up. So I'm so excited to learn from you.
I brought a little reishi cacao latte with me with college for our happy hour.
I love it. Yeah, I got what is in mine? There's reishi, there's cacao, collagen, coffee, ashwagandha. I think that's it. The whole shebang. Exactly. So I'm going to do a quick intro and then we're going to jump right in. All right. So if you guys are new to happy hours and all that kind of stuff, my name is Laura Martin. I am a self-sabotaging, I don't know what the heck I was doing with my life, kind of living, from binge drinking, binge eating, just suffering from all of these different IBS and everything in between, to now running a nutrition consulting company that helps women suffering from anxiety and depression to heal using nutrition. Which sounds like a plot twist because when you have all this stuff going on, but we work in what we do, what we struggle with. And so I remember all too well just being trapped by the way my brain worked, and my anxiety and my depression and my eating disorders and my inner traumas, all the kind of things that were going on in my life, and really taking that out of my body. And then fast forward to the life that I have now, which is just supercharged and delicious and everything I never could have imagined. And so the whole purpose of these happy hours is to bring people on that their stories have inspired me in some way, and I know by all means the things that they're doing in this world are what we need more of and we need to amplify. And I know that people that are following me will resonate so deeply, and you are truly one of those people. Just the mission that you're on right now, and I know you made a shift into the Above.Dysfunction and all that kind of stuff. When did you make that? That was what, a year ago about?
Yeah, it's been a year. Crazy.
Yeah, and okay, so we'll get into it. But anyone that is just starting out on their journey, or if you've been through the trenches and you don't really know where else to turn to, health is holistic and it takes every pillar, and really healing those inner child is one of the main things I encourage you to do, but it is a hard thing to look inward for. So without further ado, Amanda, would you like to introduce yourself and share with everyone about who you are?
Yes, I love the people who are joining this live and commenting. It's making me so happy. Oh my God, who am I? Yeah, so similar to your story, I was a total binge drinker. All 4 years of college. Anyone who knows me from that era, I went out all the time. And I grew up in a household that was incredibly dysfunctional, but I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea until it started showing up in my life, in the relationships that I was in, and the patterns that just kept repeating, and it made absolutely no sense. And I just even remember going to my first therapy session and telling her my story, and her being like, wow, you have a substantial amount of trauma. And I was like, not me. What are you talking about? I was in such denial about the trauma that I was carrying. So that kind of transformed me. Once I graduated college, I wanted to be a therapist, but then I got into the coaching world. It just magically happened. And I help people with inner child work. And it's just, slowly I transitioned into helping people with inner child work. It started off as something totally different, but that is just my jam right now, is helping people reconnect to their inner child. And for those of you who don't know what that is, or we'll definitely get into it during this happy hour, I'm sure, but it's just the little part of you that experienced growing up in whatever household that you grew up in. And regardless of what level of trauma you have, we all have inner child healing to do. So this benefits anyone to learn about this kind of work.
And I think, like, you said it so beautifully, is like, the same thing happened to me. Is I showed up to therapy and I was like, I don't have trauma. And they're like, are you kidding? Like, do you know your story? And I was like, yeah, but like, I'm so, and I say this all the time, but like, when you're used to feeling like shit, whether it's health stuff or life stuff or just whatever, that's your normal. So you don't really classify it as anything. You're like, that's my thing. And the way that I'm dealing with it is I'm abusing my body. I'm escaping my body because I can't be in this life. I need this false high that I'm going to be chasing. I need to drink because the weekends are when I can have fun. I need to consume a bunch of food because this is how I soothe that inner child that can't actually come out. So I'm going to binge eat and try and quiet all this kind of stuff that's going on. So I'd love to hear more about what your story was of this whole kind of awakening and the unearthing, because it is scary. Like, it's scary when they're like, hey, do you want to like go look at your inner child? You're like, not really.
I remember when my therapist first like called my inner child into the room. I was like, this bitch is crazy. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear here, but
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, crazy. Like, I'm not a child. Why do I need to call my child into the room? And she'd be like, is she here? Is she present with me? Like, I literally don't know what you're talking about, because I was that disconnected. And that in my cycles, like what you were just talking about, the patterns were so normal for me that it made no sense. But as to how this all happened, I think, like, some people will say they have like one moment that really transformed them and set them on their awakening or their path. I think I had many, but most of them were romantic relationships that just broke me, just absolutely broke me. And I think we all learn through such different lessons. Like, some people learn through food, some people, their relationship with food, some people learn through relationships or their career. But for me, it was my romantic relationships. And in them was being reflected all the things from my childhood that I hadn't healed. And I kept thinking it was like the relationship and working on that person and wanting to fix it. And it wasn't until I finally saw it for the lesson that it was, that the whole journey really started to move along. And that's when I finally was like, I'm going to see a therapist. It was after many toxic relationships that ended. And I was like, where am I? Who am I? Similar, I know, to your story. It's like, you got to hit that bottom to finally help.
And like, who is it that says, I think it's Brene Brown, and how she's like, you know, I call it my rock bottom, but my therapist calls it a soft awakening.
I love it.
Yes, I totally agree. Because it is, I mean, relationships of any sort. Like, we have relationships with people, we have relationship with career, we have relationship with food, we have relationship with money. And how that all comes up starts with your inner child, right? So if you're abusing one thing, if you're sitting there and expecting something to change, the only catalyst and the only actual, not to say like blame or fault or any of that, but you are responsible to, if you want to change that behavior, how do you go about doing that, right? So I guess the first place to start is, how did you come to know what the inner child was? Like, when your therapist was like, hey, you want to talk to your inner child? You're like, no, I'm not psychotic. Like,
I'm not.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was like, I'd been living in self-hatred for so long that it finally started to catch on, because in the beginning, the inner child just felt like compassion towards self. It's like you can't to a little kid. So regardless of the fact that I couldn't connect with my inner child immediately, which is, excuse me, which is something that a lot of my clients struggle with, connecting to their inner child immediately, I still felt the compassion of being able to feel like I was connecting with a little girl and give her like the love that she had always wanted. And it just took it took many sessions for me to start actually knowing that it was me. But the connection of compassion was always there from the beginning. She even said, bring her up to you and let her cuddle up next to you? Or can you tell her something nice? And that was such a drastic change from the way that I had been living that I could never go back. It was like something, doors had just opened to self-compassion in my mind.
That's incredible. I remember in a Reiki session, that's kind of what happened with me. It's like, get into bed and like hug her. And I was like, hmm. And it's been one of the most profound things where it was just like, oh, okay. Like that inner child, it needs to be nurtured, and you don't really even think of it. So what is, like, someone, they're like hearing inner child, like how would you kind of describe it and explain it to someone who's just starting out?
Yes. I think the most simple way, we have inner children, which is kind of a new concept. It's like you don't just have one child. We have all different ages of the children that live inside of us, but it's whatever you get to connect to first. So for me, it's pretty simple, and you can even do it once you finish watching this or when you hop off, is like just look into the corner of your room and imagine yourself as a little kid and just see what comes to life in front of you. And you'll be amazed actually how easy it is to just imagine yourself. Most of my clients see themselves in a cute outfit that they dressed up in as a little kid. And it's usually, around the age of like 4 to 7. And they're just, we don't consciously do it, but once we set the intention, that's what I would say is like setting the intention. I want to connect to my inner child. And you might feel silly or weird, but once you start doing it, like they appear very easily in front of you and you're able to imagine them. And what it actually is, of course, it's part of you. That part of us never goes away. It's always there. And I used to always say it's like people don't want to go back and do the work of healing their childhood because they're scared or it feels overwhelming. But your inner child is running your life, whether you want them to be or not.
So true.
Like they're always there, whether you're acknowledging that they're within you or you're not. They're the ones who are acting out these patterns because they want your love, and they are wanting you to finally turn around and like give them affection and be there for them.
Yeah.
And that's the best way to describe it. It's the loving part of you who wants affection and who wants your love, but we're usually not connected to that part of us. Most of us aren't.
It's like that, like, because we're at our most raw form, right? Like when we're young and no one's explaining to us that, like, oh, this is a negative emotion you're having. How do you want to process it? How do you, and usually it's shamed, right? So that's why a lot of us are silenced when we have this quote unquote negative emotion and like, it's not okay. And, honey over vinegar, whatever it is that your parents told you growing up. And so we shy away and we shut that out. We take it out on ourselves, our lives, our partners in so many different ways. So when we have this inner child, like even when you were saying that, I was like, I'm picturing myself. I was like 4 years old. I was like in a Cinderella dress. Like as you were saying that, I was like, I see you, girl. I see you in my office right there. So that's great. But it's one of those things where it's like no one's explaining to us. So we carry that with us throughout our entire life, being like, oh, I was wrong. I just actually had a conversation with my dad because he's the one that said to me, like, honey over vinegar. And I've carried that with me. I am now 27 years old. I've carried that with me my whole life, where I thought he meant, like, you can't talk about your negative feelings, like all this kind of stuff. So I called him in the middle of my quarantine, listening to Beyonce, having these like soulful moments. I'm like, Dad, what did, and he's like, I am so sorry. That's not what I meant. Like, wow. At all. He's like, I didn't mean it as a characteristic trait. And he like broke it all down. And he's like, you've been carrying that with you all this time. And I was like, oh yeah, like ex-boyfriends, everyone has heard it, that like honey over vinegar, I'm not allowed to do anything until I burst. And he was just like, ooh, okay, wise words, like parenting fail, but like as well, like he's not to blame. He didn't know, he was just saying words. But like that's my job, and that's like anyone that's listening to that, it's your job to see these characteristics where like, and like for you, you said like, oh, I'm pushing away relationships. This is okay, why am I doing that? Ooh, I got to talk to my therapist about this, or I got to dive a little bit deeper. So how do you really like invite people to do that? Because that is scary. Like that's scary. Like,
and honestly, I just saw something about this before we hopped on. It's like you can't force anyone into this kind of stuff. You really can't. You have to be ready. So that's the first part. And I will say it's like it's willingness, and it is also that bottom, like that feeling like, oh gosh, what am I going to do? And I think it does take people who have denial around their trauma, it does take them time to get to that space of like, okay, maybe this isn't just the external things that are showing up in my life now. Maybe this is deeper.
Yeah.
And to me, like that just showed up instantly. It was like, it took some time for me to be like, okay, yeah, maybe this is because of what happened in my past. So getting them to dive deeper, of course, is willingness. And I think once people get a taste of that compassion, like I said, like once we do that first session where they get to like connect with your child, and I don't know a single damn person in this world who doesn't struggle with being mean to themselves, a single person who doesn't have an inner critic. So when they have this tangible tool that's more than just like journaling or affirmations or all of that, it's like real, it goes right to the core. When they have that, I don't know, people just tend to want to stick around and get more of it, even when it gets really sticky and messy.
Yeah. So I wanted to unpack two things that you said there. Is one, what are common ways that this shows up? So it's perfectionism, all that kind of stuff. What are some other things where like, if people don't know, they're like, oh, that's just my normal. Like, that's just my thing. Like, and people love it. Like, I talk with people and I'm like, dude, stop talking your inner mean bitch. Like, let that stop. And they're like, I get motivated by that. And I'm like,
No.
no. Like, and I've been one of those people where I was like, I literally created my company out of being a dick to myself. I'm like, so I get that. But like, so what are some other things other than just like being a perfectionist and all this kind of stuff that you do kind of see people like childhood trauma come up in?
Totally. Like the ways that their inner critic and their inner mean girl comes out.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It's so hidden in a lot of different ways. So I think that's a really hard question, because sometimes people don't even know they're being mean to themselves. Like, I actually talk to a lot of people who have no idea how mean they are to themselves. Because it's, if you grew up with a parent who taught you, didn't teach you self-compassion, constantly talk to you in that way, your voice is their voice. You don't even necessarily have your own centered voice. So a lot of how you're going through the day and talking to yourself is just like how you learned and how you grew up. So it doesn't feel hateful to you necessarily. It's like your normal inner dialogue. But as you said, the people who I see most commonly, I think that I attract into my business are like super type A perfectionist type people, for sure. And definitely more on the side of like needing control and feeling like they are having a hard time surrendering. So I think that voice can just show up in the way that you motivate yourself. Like you said, like, are you motivating yourself through compassion? I was even talking to a client the other day of like wanting to get up and clean the house. And we're so used to motivating ourselves by being like, oh, you're so lazy. Like, why haven't you done this yet? Your house is disgusting. What's wrong? Instead of like, it's okay. Like, I know this is really hard for you, but like, we're going to get up and do this together.
Yeah.
Many people just don't have that language. So it's hard to say people are like living with that self-hatred and they don't even know to what extent it's ruling their life.
It's incredible. And I mean, it's like, as soon as you can hear the internal dialogue, where you're like, wow, that was really rude. Like, no shit, you're struggling with like self-confidence. Like, who talks to themselves that way? And like, that's one of the things, if you can get like silent enough to actually hear it, and you're just like, oh no. And then seeing that reflected out, like for me, it was like with eating disorder, right? Like it was like this control, it was this perfectionism. It like came out in that way. And then it came out with like boundaries and relationships and doing all the, and it's like, it's different layers that come out, and it's not just like one thing. It's just like, oh fuck. Like, what else can we unpack so that you can live a life that isn't, what is it, like chasing these highs, right? Because you're always looking for your parents' validation. And like, if you're never getting that, and I was reading in one of your posts and it like resonated deeply with me, where it was like what was it about, like high achieving, but you never celebrate your successes.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, guilty.
Yeah, huge.
It's so big. And like, the other thing I wanted to unpack was like, a lot of us think that like childhood trauma has to mean like we were abused or raped or any of that stuff, which, yes, that is a big one. But kind of unfold, what are some other ways that trauma could have affected people, where they like sit there and they're like, my childhood is fine, like happy-go-lucky Larry, and you're like, but was it? Like,
Gosh, and it's like so true to the people who are like, I have. I'm like, no, you didn't. If you're telling me you didn't, each have like little flaws that happened that have made us who we are. And it's such a good question. Like, I'm so glad this is starting to finally get out into the world, that there's more than that, like, deep of trauma. And it can have such an effect. Like, different things can have such an effect on different people. So, number one thing that I see is just, like, emotionally unavailable parents and emotionally mature parents. And the research on how much that affects you alone is so significant, because you know, we come into this world needing someone to show us how to feel our emotions and how to feel like we're part of a community. And when you grow up with a parent who isn't in tune with their own emotions, which most of the generations, you know, before us are not, due to lots of different reasons, that's a really scary environment to grow up in. And it teaches us a lot about self-abandoning and just not honoring, as you said, like the negative emotions when they come up. So emotionally immature, huge one, narcissistic parents, alcoholic parents, even just parents who got a divorce. It's all trauma, and it's being worked on.
and that's such a, like, all of it just resonates. And something I see often is that, like, then we seek that outward in our future relationships, like our friendships, our circles, our lifestyle choices, all that kind of stuff. So it really is, I know a lot of women I've worked with where they're like, yeah, like, I'm not too keen on my boyfriend, but da 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 da, like, we're people pleasers. And like, that's what I was, right? Like, I was a people pleaser, dated an addict, like, attracted in exactly like what my life circumstance was, even though if I looked back at my childhood, I'm like, it was fine. But like, I like actually look at it and I'm like, honey, your mom was an alcoholic, and there was a lot of things to unpack there. But like, because you're so used to it, you don't know. And it only shows up when you start to look at what are you actually surrounding yourself in your present.
I love
that.
I love that. Yeah. When you're used to it and you're surrounded by it, and then you continue to be surrounded by it in your adult life, it's like nothing's out of place.
Exactly. So what was, you said yours was kind of like a rock bottom, and then you started therapy. So what was kind of that whole process for you? Like, what was the journey of stepping away from the binge drinking, the escapism, and the whole college girl route? What was that kind of evolution to who you are now?
It was hard. That was it was like, yeah, it was so difficult. I mean, that was around, it was also when my health issues started, so it was all intertwined. It was like this, I guess it was like a big awakening of sorts. It was just another layer. It was like all my health issues started, a toxic relationship ended, and when that relationship ended, no joke, for the first time I was 21. I was like, maybe I should deal with the fact that I didn't grow up with a dad and I've never talked to him. At 21, I was like, okay, maybe I should do that. It had been buried in my psyche growing up that I literally remember telling my therapist that I wasn't even bothered. I was like, well, it doesn't matter because he wasn't here, so who cares? And once I got deeper into that, like, there was a lot to unpack there, of course, but yeah, I think it was really that relationship ending, and thank God it did. It did. So I was able to transition out of college eventually, and I got the hell out of my hometown. I took my therapist's advice. She was like, you have no idea what it's going to be like when you get a breath of fresh air away from your family system. And I moved, and that changed my life, like, above anything else. That was the best thing I ever did, was get away from my family, get away from the relationships that I was in college, and just like give myself a fresh start with a lot of support. But it was hard. It was definitely hard.
Of course, because it's recreating a life that you've known for 21 years. You know, you're like, okay, so what's my new normal? How do I create a home? Like, I did the same thing. I moved to freaking Asia. Like, And even then there's still stuff where like what you said, like my therapist brings stuff up and she's like, and to me I'm like, that happened like I was like 19, doesn't matter, like, and then you see it, you're like, oh, that matters, like I see it now. But you have to be in a safe place to actually deal with that stuff. And I think that goes for health, that goes with relationships, that goes for any of it. Like you have to be in a space of, I'm home, I'm safe, I can lean into this subject to actually welcome that in. So I agree. Like there's a difference between like running away and like escapism. And I think like what you touched on is like in college, that's escapism.
Yes.
Right? And like you can also use running away as a way to run home. And I don't think that's really ever intentional. That's why like something I find really interesting is like you can leave your home country, your home state, your home, whatever, your environment, because you need to get out of it. But eventually it's going to catch up to you. And I think that's where we're starting to see in a global perspective, that's what's fucking happening, right? Like you can't outrun anything. You just have to kind of sit with it and heal it.
Yeah.
So what are some like tools of allowing life, like stepping into that inner child work? Like say someone can't afford a therapist right now or any of that kind of stuff. So what are the kind of steps of like, hey, how can I welcome this in? Because I'm sick of my own shit, right? But I want to take responsibility.
That I hope those kind of people are on this. Yeah, if you're not ready for therapist yet, but you're like, this is resonating and I want to connect with my inner child, there's so many good things. I think just journaling and like starting, if you enjoy journaling, don't do it if you don't enjoy it, but like starting to write to your inner child and just start like a dialogue with them. I found that to be really therapeutic for me, is just starting to speak to them and write, or even allowing the opposite, allowing them to write to you and be like, hey, child, like what do you need to say to me about this situation right now? And you'd be surprised how much your mind just kind of like takes over and starts writing and starts allowing things to come up. And on top of that, if you go to Insight Timer or YouTube, you will find a plethora of inner child meditations. There's so many that are just awesome and allow you to connect. But you know, I think people get discouraged and they run away a little because it can take some time, especially if you know have forgotten a lot of your childhood or that part of you's really pushed down. So just being really patient with yourself and knowing like I'm coming up on I think 3.5 years of doing this work, and I still find like a new layer of inner child work every time I do it. And so just knowing like it's a lifelong journey of connecting to your inner child. It does not happen in one meditation, and you'll always be surprised by like the nuances that come up when you continue to connect with them.
Exactly. It's a continuous journey. Like whoever is listening to this right now, you're how old? That's how many years you've been carrying this with you. Like give it that plus double, like to keep going through. But like it's the same way when I'm talking to people about health, right? Like it's taking responsibility and giving yourself patience and grace through that, but continually be passionately curious. Like, but like for my following that is going to listen to this and stuff, like I know a big thing is that this whole need to control dieting and this whole needing, like you hold so much trauma in your gut. You hold so much trauma in your body, right? Like the whole somatics, I've had like 2 of those kind of therapists on here to kind of talk about that, but ways I've seen it show up where it's just like, okay, like your anxiety, your depression, all this kind of stuff. But because we sit here, and I loved I was just looking through your feed before getting on here, the good vibes only, like, no, that's bullshit kind of thing. So I want to talk more on that, is like, it's okay to not be okay and say I'm not okay all the time, and just like kind of expand on that. Like the whole, I just loved it. And Greta, I was like, yes.
I know for me, my own set of gut issues makes so much sense given my trauma, and it's so much of it is like undigested emotion and like clenching and all that stuff. So feeling my feelings has helped me so much in terms of my health stuff and my gut stuff as well. I don't think I'll ever be able to measure it, but I know for a fact that it has unlocked so much. And it it was the hardest thing for me to release that control. Like, I was terrified of crying in front of other people or being emotional in front of anyone. I was always so strong. I was like the mama bear of the group. So allowing myself to start to feel was like a floodgate opened, especially when I moved to California and I was like alone in a new apartment. I don't know how it was for you when you first moved. I was alone, and it opened up so much. Like, when you're just like single and alone and in an apartment in a new place, it's like, that was a great catalyst for me, because it just forced me to kind of like bring things up and purge them. And that was good. But the good vibes only movement is, I'm so glad that's kind of getting taken right now with everything else that's going on. Like, that's the first thing to go, is the good vibes only
I love it. Like, I love that it's like being taken out of, and you're like, hey, do you want to cry? Or do you like want to be pissed? Or like any of these other emotions that like we're allowed to feel. And that's the generation gap, because you see that. Thank God, like, my dad is such like a hippie man, where like I literally call him like every day of my life, like crying about Beyonce. But like, I know a lot of people and a lot of my friends, like, they have this whole different life and they can't connect with their parents. So like, going home for the holidays or something like that, it's just like, oh no, we don't talk about that. Especially in Asia, like, we keep it in our family. So it's really hard with like the mental health movement here and like being okay and all that kind of stuff. It's just not spoken about. So like, it drives my gears up a wall. But like, when I saw that on your profile, I was like, yes, okay. I love just like ditching the whole concept of the negativity around emotions. Like, no emotion is negative unless it's malicious. Like, if it's malicious and it has malicious intent and it's to harm people, yeah, of course, get that fucking shit out of here. But like, if it's just like you're angry, like, what is the YouTube video where it was the dad where his kid is just like throwing the temper tantrum? Oh my God. Yes. Like, I was like, yes, like, that's a global thing we all need to be doing, of like, throw your fucking temper tantrum and be okay. And know that, like, this is your safe space to do that. Because if you hold it inside of you, that's where we start to see health issues. That's where we start to see trauma. That's where we start to have the self-inflicted trauma, because then you're starting to self-soothe with alcohol, drugs, food, men, women, I don't know, like, whatever it is, all of it. Like, you're just trying to mask and escape because you don't know what it's like to be in body, you know? I think that's the most incredible thing.
I think the like emotion piece too is like honoring the inner child. And I think if you're connected to your inner child, you can't be in a space of positive vibes only. It's almost impossible. Just think of a kid, like, they feel the full range of emotions. In the matter of 10 minutes, they can go from like really freaking pissed off to like super joyful and cuddly and totally fine. But like, it's honoring that like wave of emotions has been like, I used to think that if I cried today, my day was ruined. That's how I felt about negative emotions. It was like, oh my God, cry, like, that's the worst day ever. Whereas now it's like, I can cry at 10 a.m. and then like my day's fine. An hour later, I'm like, okay, it was fine. You let out your emotions and now you just go on with your day like a person.
But that's so true. I think, like, I mean, I know, like, when I was teaching English, like, it was pre-K. So those kids, like, they come in, they're crying for like an hour, and then they're like, ooh, butterfly. And you're like, what? What just happened? Like, and I'm like, can I embody that? Can I move forward? Wanting to bring it back to like triggers was one of the things I wanted to talk about as well. It's just like, what kind of comes up for clients that you work with and people that you work with, and how do they navigate through triggers? Because when you do awaken this, you're just a lot more sensitive. Like, and so what are some kind of like tips and tricks to, again, going back to creating a safe space, but when we are triggered, what do we move through? And what are common triggers? Like, things like that.
Yeah, the number one thing when you said that I thought of is like family. Like, family is the most trigger of all the triggers. And it's the whole thing too of like, you can't heal in the environment that you experience trauma in. So whether that's a family member or an ex-partner or whatever it is, like, that shit's going to be triggering if you're in the middle of healing. And then you're like, if you're in the middle of like deep inner child healing and really going through it, and you talk to someone who was part of the trauma that you're healing, it's probably going to trigger you at some point or another. So that's what I would say. I think like a huge part of my healing was taking a break from the people who had caused me harm, like taking a long break. And my inner people pleaser hated that, hated the boundaries, hated doing that. But overall for my triggers, that was amazing because they were just I was able to focus on me and my healing. And when I did get triggered, for those of you who are experiencing any kind of trigger, it's learning how to self-soothe without going to alcohol or food. And if you do, that's okay, not beating yourself up. Like, that's part of the inner child work. Like, you know, you can choose food and that's fine. And then an hour later, can you still be with yourself and self-soothe after you've made that decision? It's not one or the other in black and white the way trauma makes us think it is, you know? So that's big. And self-soothing, literally the best thing is just like wrap your hands around yourself and like give yourself a hug and move your hands up and down. Because my first therapist told me, like, we produce the same chemical for ourselves when we self-touch that we do when other people touch us. And that sucked all my power back into my body. Like, we have all the power to self-soothe. We don't always need someone else. It can be lovely to have the support, but you really have yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that's so 2 points is one, when you were talking about like the drinking and the eating and stuff like that, like that's the difference between like eating your emotions and emotional eating. Like, you can eat or drink and whatever, but like, what are you doing after the fact? Like, you know, that's not going to actually heal you, right? And so you can sit with it after. And then the thing about touch, I actually just read this too, because when we pop out of the womb, the first sense that we are engaged with is touch. Someone touches us. Like, that's our first thing out of like our mom, right? And so that's why all of us are so sensitive to it. And I like, during quarantine right now, like that is such a big thing where I was like, everyone's gonna go nuts because no one's touching each other. And it's not like we're like sitting here like this. Like, that's not a normal thing for us to be doing. And it is, like, yesterday I just went with a massage with my best friend and I was like, oh my God, touch my body. Like, it feels so good. And I try and get one like once a week because it is something where it's like, when you're going through a traumatic experience, not saying I'm in a current one, but like if you are feeling a lot of emotions, we forget how simple tune into yourself and like literally just like sit here and be like, I love you. Yes. Like, this feels good. We forget it so much and it's so sad. Like, it's honestly like simple techniques of just like, what can you do to make you feel better that isn't escaping the body, you know? And like, because those are our old wounds. Those are something where like we weren't this is why like mindfulness programs need to happen in schools. Don't get me started. But but it's like talking about the emotions and creating a space of like, this is how you feel, this is how you can navigate through and all that kind of stuff. So that's why I friggin' love the work that you're doing, because as adults, if we want to have conscious children, we need to be conscious. We need to have that conversation with ourselves, and we need to understand ourselves to be able to create rock star offsprings that will heal this world, you know?
All around the world looking for.
Exactly. Is there any other things that you wanted to address? Kind of chatting through, what were some other things? I was talking about triggers. Yeah, like what are, like you said, journaling, meditation, all that kind of stuff. I know a lot of people don't like journaling and meditation though. That's the thing. Like, I don't really, like, what are some other ways that you use with people? Like, is that like your only things where you're just like, you gotta do it, sit with the discomfort?
No. I think that each person finds their inner child in a different way. So I feel like my approach is more like, okay, we're going to try this. You hate it? That's cool. We're going to go to the next thing, because each person has like their way of connecting. But I found the one that works the best so far really is just like, I'm talking to you, you're envisioning your inner child, you're having a conversation with them, and I'm helping you guide it. So that's like my intuitive work that actually happens during sessions.
I love that. I love it so much. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and then you can share with everyone how to get in touch with you and nurture their inner child. So first question, how would you describe happy? Like, what is happy to you?
Oh my gosh, girl. What is happy? To me, like, happy is definitely freedom. I think that's why I created my business, because it's freedom from the beliefs that we carry from childhood, to me specifically. And that's meant so many things in like starting my business, leaving relationships, moving to California. So to me, happiness is like, yeah, feeling the ultimate freedom in all of life from past chains.
I would agree. And like, if anyone hasn't tuned into their inner child, you're not going, sorry, but you probably won't find this amount of freedom if you don't. Like, it's been the biggest, just like lock and key kind of moment. So I definitely think that's beautiful. It's definitely. So my other one, what is it? Oh, what are 3 words that you would give to your younger self?
Would give my younger self. Wow, these are amazing. These are amazing questions. I'm not even going to say words. To me, it's like, it's actually just presence. So I'm going to choose one word. It's like giving her presence. I will say like my favorite thing lately, which has literally been asking her to come cuddle in bed with me and like brushing her hair, which just might sound so crazy to people. But once you're like that, like it feels so good to give yourself that amount of compassion. So just presence, like pure presence is going to be my word for the part of you like never gotten your attention, essentially.
I love that. I love that. And then what is one word you would use to describe right now for you? Like where you're at currently in your life?
Expansion. Yeah, expansion. And the pair of like so much breaking down, but I have felt more expansion in the last 6 months than I've ever felt in my life. Like, yeah, so much is just blasting open. So
I love that. I love that. Well, share with our lovely people how they can get in contact with you and learn more and do the work that you do and all that kind of stuff.
all the goodies.
Yes.
Yeah, you can find me at Above.Dysfunction. My website is just Above.Dysfunction.com. And I think that's it. Everything's Above Dysfunction, so you'll find me pretty quickly.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me and staying up and having this nice little happy hour with me. And then for anyone watching, we are continuing this conversation in the Happy Gut Gang over on Facebook, where I will post this on my feed and all that kind of stuff. So you can come join us there. Thank you so much, Amanda. Like, my heart is just like feeling it so much. But enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will chat with you soon, my dear.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.